So we have few in the audience, and as people join, they won't miss too much because I'm just starting with a little bit of an introduction. So first of all, thank you for everyone for joining us for a jewel in Indra's net celebrating Sri Lankan art. And thank you to Amrita, Jhaveri, Sandhini, Poddar, and Saskia, Fernando for joining us today. I wanted to start by giving a little introduction to those who may not be familiar with Art South Asia Project or Support Local Art Talk series. So ASAP is a UK-based art education and development non-for-profit. We support initiatives to widen and deepen the engagement with modern and contemporary visual arts from South Asia and its diaspora. ASAP works with institutions and individuals supporting selected research projects, publications, exhibitions, and events. We offer annual grants and facilitate access to wider knowledge networks in collaboration with expertise across the nations of Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka and its diaspora. Support Local Art, the talk series, is an initiative organized by Saskia Fernando Gallery to create a much needed platform for conversation on the developments of the Sri Lankan art industry. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers today. First of all, Amrita Jhaveri. Amrita is the founder and director of Jhaveri Contemporary in Mumbai. Prior to founding the gallery, Amrita worked as an independent advisor, advising private collectors on aspects of modern and contemporary South Asian art. She has created and managed private and corporate art collections, ambitious artist projects, and large-scale commissions. An exhibition maker at heart, Amrita co-curated Thinking Tantra at Drawing Room London from 2016 to 17, and South Asian Modernists, 1953 to 63 at the Whitworth, Manchester, 2017 to 18. Amrita sits on the advisory boards of Code, New Delhi, Museum of Art and Photography, Bangalore, and the Drawing Room in London. So next, Sandhini Poddar. Sandhini is a London-based art historian and adjunct curator at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project, where she is responsible for research and acquisitions for the Future Museum. Previously, Sandhini served as associate curator of Asian art at the Solomon Earl Guggenheim Museum. During her tenure, she curated groundbreaking exhibitions on modern and contemporary Asian art, including V.S. Gaitonde, Painting as Process, Painting as Life, Being Singular Plural, and Anish Kapoor Memory. She also organized the Guggenheim's presentation of Zarina, Paper Like Skin. Lastly, Saskia Fernando. Saskia Fernando opened her eponymous gallery in 2009. After her experience as curator of Paradise Road Galleries, SFG was established with the aim to further professionalize the local art industry and formalize Saskia's work relationships with many of the island's foremost contemporary artists. Saskia Fernando Gallery represents artists from the local contemporary art industry and/or artists of Sri Lankan origin. The gallery has to date collaborated on group exhibitions of Sri Lankan contemporary art in London, Dubai, Singapore, and Los Angeles. The gallery also engages on non-profit projects to benefit the industry's growth, such as initiatives including the Support Local Art platform and the A4A Production Fund. So before I start, I wanted to give a little bit of housekeeping so everyone knows what's going on for our session today. So the session will take place for about 50 minutes, and we'll have 10 minutes for questions afterwards. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will read them out to our panelists. The session is being recorded and will be put on both ASAP and Saskia Fernando's website in the next few months. And finally, please note that this session will end once we're all finished and there'll be no once questions are all done. So before I go into asking questions to the panel, since today is all about celebrating Sri Lankan modern and contemporary art, we wanted to start by thinking through the key events in the field of the contemporary art ecosystem in Sri Lanka in the recent past. 2009 was a key year for the ecosystem and Sri Lanka at large. It was the year the Civil War ended, the year that Saskia Fernando Gallery was established, and the first Colombo Art Biennale, Imagining Peace, opened. This was a pivotal moment where Sri Lanka saw the beginning of growth in representative for artists and modern contemporary art in the region, and ideas of a more professionalized art industry were instilled. While Colombo Art Biennale only continued for 4 editions until 2016, it inspired countless other initiatives in the Sri Lankan art scene. Notably, Columbuscope, which started in 2013, which has now become Sri Lanka's most prominent festival platform for the contemporary arts under the vision of artistic director Natasha Jinwala, and the Museum of Modern Contemporary Art in Sri Lanka was founded in 2016 under the instrumental leadership of Yamey Pereira. Since 2009, there have been several pivotal exhibitions that have celebrated Sri Lankan contemporary artists internationally and in Sri Lanka. In 2009, Yamey curated the one-year drawing projects between 4 of the most important Sri Lankan contemporary artists at Dhabi Art Foundation in New Delhi. In 2011, Asia House hosted contemporary art from Sri Lanka in London, which is the first major exhibition of Sri Lanka's leading contemporary artists to be held since the end of the Civil War. More recently, Bike Art Gallery in LA presented Crossing Place in 2019. MMCA Sri Lanka opened its inaugural exhibition 100,000 Small Tales in 2020, and in 2021, The Gift, the unprecedented experimental artist commission project, took place at Lunaganga in Sri Lanka. Today, Sri Lankan modern and contemporary art is in the collections of Fukuoka Asian Art Museum, LACMA, the Tate Modern, and Kwagama, a list which will only expand as time goes on. Increased visibility for Sri Lankan modern and contemporary art on the global stage is crucial and champions the careers of both the artists and the art workers. This brings us to the reason we're all here today. How can the representatives of the Sri Lankan art scene work towards sustaining and growing international recognition and exposure for the country's vibrant modern and contemporary artwork? So over to our panelists. So all three of you are engaging with and entangled in the Sri Lankan art ecosystem on various levels. I'd like each of you to start by giving us a little bit of background on how your research and representation of Sri Lankan artists began. So Saskia, maybe you'd be the first person to start.
Thank you, Mala. I think the beginning of SFG was really the point when I became more professionally involved in working with the Sri Lankan contemporary art scene. And the reason I started Saskia Fernando Gallery was because of my work with artists prior, as you mentioned, at Paradise Road Galleries, but also having identified during that time that professional representation was needed, and we needed a standalone gallery with an exhibition calendar and a goal to collaborate internationally and work on expanding the visibility of the industry internationally. It had become quite clear to me when I had worked previously within my father's space. And I think SFG, starting up SFG, it's been a sort of gradual evolution, to be honest. It took several years for me to really formalize the relationships that I had. The basis on which I started the gallery and began working with many leading contemporary artists was that they knew me. Some of them knew me from a very young age. But of course, also I was starting a standalone space in an industry that had very good galleries, but nobody was taking on this type of representation. So the leading artists that were willing to work with me at the beginning also did so based on a longer relationship, which of course began with my father's collecting. And that was a big introduction for me as well into the art scene. So that's how it began. And initially, a lot of the work was about presenting shows and trying to collaborate internationally. And I think we did that quite successfully quite early on. And it showed how interested people were in learning more about the art scene. And you can see basically the snapshots trying to summarize, I think, some of the international exhibitions that we presented. That was this particular one, which was at Asia House in 2011, was the very first show that we presented. But that was quite early on in the gallery's life. It was in the first 2 years. So it was really exciting to work on such a major project so early and to find the funding for it and to make it happen. I think it became quite clear to me earlier on and now as well that the idea of presenting international group shows was incredibly important simply because of the lack of visibility. And that's why this whole model of working with galleries, Breeze Little Gallery, which was then run by Josephine Breeze, who curated the first show with me in 2011, is where we presented another 2 exhibitions, in fact. This show of Jagat Veer Singers and a group show titled Emergency. We also did a 2-man show of Chandragupta Thenora and Jagat Veer Singh in the same space. And in Dubai, of course, at XVA Gallery, that was also a group show that we presented in 2013. That was before our participation in Art Dubai a few years later. And I think London and Dubai, Singapore as well, those were very, I think there was already some amount of interest and visibility that we had in these locations because of, that it wasn't like I was working, as I mentioned, there were galleries working with the scene prior to SFG being established. We were just trying to build on and formalize and professionalize it to a certain extent. So yeah, they were collaborations that happened quite quickly, but organically as well.
Thank you. Oh, do you want to talk a little bit about LA, or are you ready to? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Saskia. Moving on to Amrita. What could you talk us through your kind of start into Sri Lankan modern contemporary art?
I think just by way of introduction, I just want to say that the gallery that I co-run with my sister Priya, is based in Mumbai. So, and I'm based in the UK. I suppose I should say that I didn't start with the idea of representing Sri Lankan art per se, but I just came across some wonderful artists who happen to be Sri Lankan or have their roots in Sri Lanka. So I'd say the 4 artists that I have worked with sporadically and some more consistently are Mohanad Kadar, Lionel Wendt, Vasantha Yogyanathan, who is half Sri Lankan and half French, and Ramesh Mario Nithyendran, who lives in Australia. So the last 2 are diasporic. Obviously, Lionel Wendt is no longer alive, and Mohanad Kadar lives in Gaul, between Gaul, Karachi, and London, I'd say. So I would say that working with these 4 artists for me was, they're all very different, make very different types of work. Some have lived in Sri Lanka, some have never lived in Sri Lanka, but have experience of it through their families. I'd say I first chanced upon Mohanad's work at the 1-year drawing project that was curated by Shamini. And I had met Shamini in London because I was also living in London. And Mohanad was also in London, I think, at that time. And I came across this work and also saw an exhibition that he'd done at Green Cardamom. And in 2011, it's a show called Scripted Across Time, Scripted Across the Indian Ocean. And at that time, Mohanad was living in Oxford, and then I had invited him to be part of a group show at Jhaveri Contemporary. Jhaveri Contemporary was really founded in 2010, first as a project space. So it was during this time in 2013, actually, that I presented one of his collages. From then on, he was very soon after represented by a gallery in New York. And it was, and I continued to follow his work, and we continued to stay friends. And it's only more recently through an invitation by Sandhini that we were able to present his work in London at Frieze. And this is just a few images from the stand. And you can see that we've included a collage and also some paintings from a series called South Ceylon. So there was a gap between, I would say, 2014 and 2022, when we were able to begin work with Mohanad again. And we hope to continue showing his work. With Went, it was a slightly different way in. And this was because my mother was a textile collector, and she was very good friends with a couple of textile dealers who used to travel to Sri Lanka collecting textiles for trade. And while they spent many years traveling to Sri Lanka, they put together this wonderful collection of works by Lionel Went, which they had shown in, the collection had been shown curated by Pooja Sood at the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum in Australia, in Japan, many years ago. And I think once the works came back from them, they had them for many years, lived with them for many years, and after a while had decided that they wanted to do something with this collection and wanted to activate it. So I got very busy going through the 300-400 prints that they had in their collection. And we had all the work documented, and I had a photography expert from France come and value all the work. And really, so we just started by documenting it all. And then in 2014, I presented a selection of work at Frieze Masters. So 2014 was quite a key year for me. We presented Muhannad Muhannad's work in the gallery in Bombay, and we had this in October at Frieze Masters. From then on, the work really caught the attention of curators who had visited the fair. We didn't make very many sales at this fair to begin with, but we did make some key sales, for instance, to the Sandhini Art Foundation. From there on, the work traveled to Documenta in Athens, to the House Masai Museum in 2017, and they published a book as well. And this wasn't purely on this single collection, but at the House Masai, they did loans from other collections in Holland and in Europe, and unfortunately not from Sri Lanka, but mostly works that were dispersed in collections in Europe. And then in 2016, they were presented at the Dhaka Art Summit, from where, of course, then they went, as I said, to Documenta and to House Masai. And then in 2022, last year, we did a really lovely show where we put Lionel's work in conversation with a young London-based artist to really show how relevant his work still was to the current conversation. So that was a very different way that we came to Lionel Went. Vasantha and Ramesh were more recent additions to the program. Vasantha's work I discovered at Photo London in 2018, when he had already done an enormous body of work based on the Ramayana and had never ever shown in India. So in 2018, we included, some of his hand-painted works in a group show when we opened our new gallery space in Colaba. And 2020 at the India Art Fair. 2021, when the world was locked down, we presented it on a wonderful online platform called South Vesa, which looked at the Southern Hemisphere and artists and galleries operating in the Southern Hemisphere. 2022, we showed the work at Frieze London. I think, Mala, you can show some pictures of Vasantha's work on our stand. So these are the large photographs, the two photographs you see on the back, and the photographic collage, the series of photographic collages along the long wall. And these were all from his book called Afterlife, and were all filmed during the Dasera festival in India. So they're quite powerful works in a way, but were very well received. at the fair, and we put them in conversation with the work of Ramesh, Mario, and Nithyendran, the sculptural ceramics you can see here. Ramesh's works we'd seen also at the Dhaka Art Summit in 2016. And we'd known about his work, but obviously he was based in Australia, and we had to sort of figure out how we were going to bring these works to India. I'd already spoken to Ramesh at that point. And we finally ended up doing a show in 2022 called The Mud and the Rainbow at the gallery in Mumbai, showed his work at the India Art Fair and at Frieze, all in 2022. And I was also working on a show called Pop South Asia, which was hosted by the Sharjah Art Foundation and included his work in that. So they're all just very different ways that I came across. So my intention was never really to necessarily present Sri Lankan art per se, but it just happens that all these artists have some link to Sri Lanka, and hopefully we can bring and present some of their works in Sri Lanka as well, because some of them haven't shown there before, but we just have to find the right opportunity to be able to do that.
Thank you, Amrita. I feel we've got a very good encyclopedic knowledge of your contributions in this field. Sandhini, do you want to go last but by no means least on your research? And obviously you play a very different role, but your research into Sri Lankan art and acquisition.
Sure. It's very different to Saskia and Amrita. So you mentioned very briefly that I had been part of the Guggenheim's team as one of the Asian art curators. So for people who are listening to us who may be unfamiliar, the Guggenheim embarked on an Asian art initiative back in 2006. So it's been a while. It's about a 16-year-old program. And the idea was to integrate the study and exhibition and interpretation and appreciation of modern and contemporary Asian art across the Guggenheim constellation, which at the time was New York, Bilbao, Venice, and Berlin. Berlin closed in 2012, but we're now in the process of working on the Abu Dhabi project, which I'll just speak about briefly. But it's the Asian art program. I mean, it was absolutely vast, monumental in its scope and its ambition. And the only way to actually tackle it was to break it down into small pieces and to think of it in terms of specializations around certain artist movements or certain artists or sites of education and pedagogy. So, we did exhibitions dedicated to really important artists like Zarina or Liu Fan, Saikwo Chang, Anish Kapoor, V.S. Gaitonde. But then we also did exhibitions based on really important movements like Gutai. There was an exhibition called Art in China. There was an exhibition that explored 120 years of Asian philosophy vis-a-vis American production. It was called The Third Mind. It was really looking at how many American artists had been looking towards Asia for inspiration for a long period of time through their travel and their education. So within that, of course, my particular purview was South Asia and also Southeast Asia. And I was mentioning this to Saskia before that, there is a certain amount of literature that's available when you're looking at either the 43 group or you're looking at the contemporary artists who really matured in the 1990s and the 2000s, but it's a limited bibliography. But as an Asian art scholar or as an art historian or a curator working in the field, of course, one is aware of it. So it's not as if it's this kind of repressed history. These are publications and articles that are available if one starts to do proper research, either with the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong or the British Library here in London. So I had been reading on some of these research arenas for a long time, but back then, which was from 2006 to 2015 that I was involved, we didn't do any exhibitions on Sri Lanka per se. But this has become much more relevant to me now because my focus has moved towards the Abu Dhabi project, which, when when the museum opens in a few years' time, I think one has to be really cognizant of the fact. I mean, Saskia mentioned this very briefly, that London and Dubai and Singapore are important nodal points for any kind of diasporic conversation about, the South Asian sphere of artistic production and intellectual production. But I think within the context of the Gulf, Amrita also mentioned the Sharjah Art Foundation. So the Gulf is a really important place outside of South Asia, where we all come together. The Sharjah Biennial for the last 20 years has been a really important meeting place. The March meetings, all of us coming together, exhibitions, a place where many of us who were not able to see each other in South Asia met. So I used to see curators and artists and academics from Pakistan because I couldn't go there, so I would see them in Sharjah and look forward to it every time we had the biennial. So the Gulf has always been an interesting meeting place, a place of confluence, and 52% of the local population of the Emirates is South Asian. 7% is Filipino. So between the 7 countries that constitute South Asia and the Philippines, that's about 60% of the audience of this museum going forward. And so within the permanent collection, I've been doing a lot of research, especially over the last 3 years since I rejoined the project, on not the 43 group, because they fall a little bit before the museum's mission, which is really to start in the 1960s, but certainly the artists who were practicing, 2 of whom are represented by Saskia, including Jagat Veerasinge and Chandragupta Tenuvara, as well as Mohanad Kadar, artists like Anuli Pereira, Shanathanan. These are sort of the vanguard of contemporary practitioners who were moving away from the kind of hegemony of modernism as experienced in the 43 group, and moving towards installation, moving towards performance, moving towards photography, moving towards collage as an expanded field in order to serve as contemporary interlocutors and witnesses to their own times. And so we're beginning the story in the collection with this peer group. But then, of course, what we can't do in the permanent collection will hopefully also then find a voice in special exhibitions, in education, in public outreach, through translations, through public engagement. I mean, there's so many different facets of curatorial work outside of just the kind of dictum of the permanent collection. But that's sort of what I'm working on right now within the particular context of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project.
Amazing, thank you. And bringing us to the title of our talk, but also the reasons we decided to kind of come together for this talk, I'll do a quick question to you, Sandhini, so you don't have to speak too much. But as the curator of Indra's Net at Frieze London last year, what was your curatorial rationale behind selections of artists and galleries? And very pivotively, we had 2 Sri Lankan artists' booths. So that's why it's so important for this talk.
Well, I was very pleased to have been invited by Frieze to serve as their guest curator last year. In fact, Amrita is the person who introduced me to Frieze 8 years ago, so I have to thank her for that. She's a veteran of Frieze London, so one should never forget your own community. Frieze London, of course, you have masters and then you have contemporary, and then within contemporary, they for the last 6-7 years that at least I've been aware, they've always had a guest curator come in to supplement or to complement what's happening in the main fair. So, and Amrita, please jump in because you know the history of this much better than me. But the idea, Mala, was to bring in voices that are not represented at the fair. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a tricky curatorial platform because I'm not free to just be the art historian or to be the curator and to come up with this fantasy list of artists. It's a commercial fair. Yeah. So I have to do a little bit of what these 2 do every day, which is quite mind-boggling, and root myself in reality, which is the reality of business, of the business of art. So we had to find galleries that were not participating in the fair but for whom the fair could provide a small subsidy as a sort of incentive to come and be part of this larger conversation, this global conversation in London. So it's quite smart on behalf of Frieze, because it's literally casting their net wider geopolitically into parts of the world that they may be unfamiliar, or certainly they don't have the network, so they don't have the contacts on the ground. So they knew that, of course, I'd been working with non-Western materials for a long time. I had been part of the Global South community for a long time. This had been my mandate at the Guggenheim for 16 years. So the galleries I was interested in were, galleries from Ho Chi Minh, for example, or from Colombo, or from Monterrey, Mexico. So bringing in voices which had been extremely important, and I want to say this again, extremely important in their local context. Mm-hmm. Okay, without these galleries, without the Jhaveri contemporaries and the Saskia Fernandos in Mumbai and in Colombo, without Gallery Quinn in Ho Chi Minh, you don't have, these are grassroots initiatives that literally uphold I really want to stress this. It's not just museums. We behave in a different stratosphere, right? I'm not the person to come to if you want to look at emerging artists. I'm just not. I don't know what's happening on the ground the way these two do. So these galleries in their local contexts are extremely important, because they are the ones who are bringing artists into the public eye, perhaps for the first time, before museums get to know about them. They give them the representation, they do the exhibitions, they do exhibition pamphlets, they go out on a limb, they take risks. The museums are not the ones who are taking the risks. It's the some smaller foundations, it's the smaller nonprofits, it's the biennials, it's the commercial galleries. So we're all part of this very interlinked and interdependent ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And because India has historically been, so dominant in terms of conversations around South Asia, I just wanted to get away from that. And I had been doing all this research for the museum already, and it was just important for me to also use Frieze as another opportunity, as another platform to highlight these great practices that are happening across the island, both within Sri Lanka, but also diasporically, again, within the context of a very global audience that appears at Frieze. I mean, I was told that 20,000 people appeared the first day. Within the course of 5 days, we probably had 50 or 60,000 people in that little exhibition. So that's just an incredible opportunity that I didn't want to miss.
Yeah. Well, I know that all of us saw, I mean, I was there to see both presentations, and they're absolutely brilliant. And maybe we'll not do too much more on Frieze, but maybe Saskia, you can talk about how important the prominence of having Dhanuwara's work on the booth, and also the context of having it recently having been at Venice as well. And I'll just share screen.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic to be given the opportunity to show the series of drawings that were connected with the project that we presented at Frieze, at the Venice Biennale, and in the collateral show that we installed the work. It was something that that arose sort of unexpectedly, and it was really about timing. And I think something really interesting around the fair itself that happens, and I think this happens at all art fairs, are the conversations and the connections that you make therein. So being able to highlight these drawings, but also being able to highlight a very important moment of Sri Lankan contemporary art, and Sandhini very specifically selecting this series by Dhanuwara and Mohanad's work, and I think bringing that together was pretty huge, actually. The visibility, but also as Sandhini said, and it's wonderful to hear it, because when you're working with the local scene in Colombo on an island, you sometimes need a bit of a reminder that you know, these are major artists who deserve the recognition, and they deserve to be on these platforms. And it's also wonderful to work with curators who really see that and want to provide platforms for that, and understand also the importance of the work that commercial galleries do. And even conversations with Amrita, who's a, you know, Frieze veteran who very generously provided the groundwork before getting to Frieze. You know, it's pretty intimidating to do your first presentation in such a massive art fair. But then at the same time, you want to make sure that you are really doing the work justice, because it is such an amazing project of Chandragupta Thenu winners. But yes, as I started with, the conversations that happen around the presentation are also so, it's really something that continues. You know, the amount of people we actually met at Frieze as well was amazing. People post-COVID that you hadn't connected with in ages. I mean, practically everybody sort of, you know, arrives at this fair, and it's intense, but it's also incredibly important to be out there, engaging and thinking up new ways to work with the scene. And yeah, it's absolutely essential to do that in the way that we're structured. But it was a wonderful presentation as well. Very, very fantastically curated by Sandhini, and yeah, wonderful timing for Thenu winner as well.
Amrita, do you want to add anything?
I'd second all the things that Saskia said. For me, showing Muhannad there was really a wonderful way to re-engage with his practice. I have to say, when we first presented his work in 2014 in this show that we had done in Mumbai, in Considering Collage, I would just like to say that I was a bit slow off the mark. I wasn't quite, you know, we'd set up the gallery in 2010, and in the first couple of years, we were just doing 2 shows a year. I wasn't quite sure about representation and what that entirely meant right away, and I just wanted to feel my way through it. So I think I was a bit slow off the mark in like asking Muhannad, would you like to join the gallery? I didn't quite know what that meant. And of course, he had a wonderful opportunity to show with a colleague of ours in New York for many years. And with Sandhini, you know, I've had a long-standing conversation. We've been beyond the art world. We've been family friends for many, many years. And she had expressed an interest in showing Muhannad's work. And it was a nice way for me to go back to Muhannad and say, is this something you really want to collaborate on? So that was really wonderful. The other wonderful thing that happened is through showing the work, I met a Sri Lankan collector in London called Anoji Amarasinghe, who very kindly, and she's a big supporter of Saskia's as well. And together we had a event, and we had a talk, which brought the community together. And so we did an event that was outside of the very busy art fair to try and shine a light on Chandragupta and on Muhannad's practice, and to talk about Sri Lankan art in kind of in a broader way. So, you know, it's through this, I mean, I hadn't met Anoji before. I think I must have met Saskia once before. It's not as if I travel to Sri Lanka very often. As much as I love it, I'd love to travel much more. I think the last time I'd been there was for the last biennial, in fact, the last Colombo biennial, where I'd supported the work of Hardeep Pandal to be presented at the last Colombo biennial. So it was just a really nice and wonderful moment, and wonderful way to bring a lot of different connections together. Yeah, so I think that's all. And thanks to Sandhini for getting us all together again.
Thank you. And Saskia, we met for the first time there as well. So it was a perfect ground. And I think this collaboration of ASAP and Support Local Art Talks came out of our first meeting with Saskia then. So it was a really amazing grounding for this kind of continued conversations around Sri Lankan art. I am conscious of time, so I only want to do one or two more questions. I know that Sandhini, you've spoken at length with us before, but also briefly about the importance of archiving Sri Lankan artists' work. And this is something that all three of you can add, and I'm very happy for anyone to start with what is really the importance of building archives for Sri Lankan contemporary artists, and what role do gallerists, but also curators, play in securing the legacies for these artists? And whoever wants to go first.
I mean, maybe I'll just say this very briefly from a museum's perspective, because what Amrita and Saskia will be doing on the ground is building up the archive in a very different way. But, I'll just give you a real world example, because I think these talks need to be based in the real world. So in order to do a single acquisition, a single museum acquisition can take about 2 to 3 years of research and due diligence. And this happens in terms of the art history, it happens in terms of conservation, it happens in terms of a financial market analysis. And both Saskia and Amrita have done this many times, so they know exactly what a long drawn out process it is. It's very coveted because you know that the artist and the artwork will be represented in the permanent collection of a major museum. The work will never be deaccessioned. It will always be open to interpretation and education and pedagogy, and also for visibility and exhibition purposes. So it's something that we all work towards and we all believe in. But in order for that due diligence to happen, we need to access archives. And so, for example, when I worked on the V.S. Gaitonde retrospective, which was first shown in New York and then at the Peggy Guggenheim in Venice, putting together his exhibition history took me 2 years. And that's one artist. And that's, I had a wonderful assistant curator, Amara Antilla, and it was literally delegated to her. And Amara literally had to go through archives in Bombay, in Delhi, in London, in the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I mean, you're getting fragments of information and you're having to, with sellotape, patch it together in this very fragile narrative called an exhibition history. And these archives really are, worth their weight in gold, because until I have a bibliography, an exhibition history, a biography, an educational sort of understanding of who the artist is, I cannot place him or her within a larger art historical narrative. I just cannot, because it would be absolutely false and incorrect from a scholarship point of view. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of information that's missing. We have never been known as being great archivists. And so the role that a museum plays, of course, is through the acquisition process or through the exhibition process. But what distinguishes a gallerist from a dealer is that a gallerist represents artists, and he or she is in that conversation or in that relationship for the long term, and is building up the artist's archive and value from scratch. And whatever, Amrita and Saskia are doing for the artists that they work with, both their projects are 13, 14 years old now, but they both represent artists now, in depth. These are no longer project spaces. They are proper galleries. Is a 20, 30, 40, 50-year view of those 10 or 15 artists that they really value, and building up their archives for researchers, for students, for museum curators, for fellow artists, for writers, for filmmakers, for cultural practitioners of any kind. I mean, we can't be extending the canon of art history if the literature is incorrect. So this is actually quite an important message to anyone who's working within the field of South Asian histories or even interested in it as an academic or a student anywhere in the world is that please continue to contribute to these archives and building these archives and make sure that they can be disseminated and made available to the public. These are not supposed to be private and hidden away. We need to find fora either online or through libraries where we can actually share this information amongst us.
Thank you. Do you, Saskia and Amrita, do you want to add to this very important call for action?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel that it is really important, at least for a lot of this material, which is either in books that are out of print. I mean, this is as far as Lionel is concerned, or published locally and not well distributed, or, you know, there might have been information, there might have been exhibitions that happened in the 30s in London. It's like, how do you find, you know, we went chasing after, he'd shown at the Commonwealth Institute, I think we'd gone chasing after this information until we realized that it had all been lost in a fire, for instance. So it's just what I've been trying to do, especially with artists when they first started, or galleries first start, they made little pamphlets or things that, you know, were in very limited editions. I just try and scan as much as I can and do something that I just call it a research document, and I keep it. It's not really circulated, but if a curator were to come to me and they can't always get their hands on the material, at least there's a digital, you know, I've just scanned them and have them available. So I mean, I feel that's really important. And the other thing is when we have publishers come to us, you know, and wanting to do books on artists. And initially I was very open to self-publishing, but I felt that was only, you know, it was limited because these books wouldn't be distributed finally. So now I'm kind of really keen, if a publisher approaches me, to work with them to find the funding and to help them do books. And in this mission, I've really been working very closely with Anita Dawood, who Sandhini knows as well. And we've worked on a few books now together, a few publications now together. And that's something that I really feel is important for artists. And unfortunately, as a gallery, I can only devote that much time and attention and resources. So if I can get one good book out a year, actually, or two, I'm really proud of it. We're a small gallery at the end of the day. We're a teenage gallery, you know, in terms of the age of the gallery. So for us, we really, you know, do try and put this all, we feel it's really important.
And we're lucky to have, I mean, at least 3 of these very pivotal people working on South Asian art on ASAP Sport, Anita, Amrita, and Sandhini as well. So all of these key players building this archive about history and artists' work, all involved in ASAP, which is very, very nice and lucky us. Saskia, do you want to go last, just to talk about your relationship and the importance for artists, or if they understand the importance of the archive as well, the artists you work with?
Yes, I think all the questions that arise when we're talking about the Sri Lankan art scene and the recognition which is taking place or growing, or, you know, the projects which need support. I think it all kind of brings us back to the archive. And after so many conversations with Sandhini, it's like I'm also kind of very archive centric. I mean, literally have one of our gallery assistants who's purely dedicated to archiving, because it is essential. And there is, I think, whether it's simply as a gallery, like Amrita highlighted the importance of publication, or it's about properly being able to facilitate, curatorial research, and simply ensuring that artist legacy is well looked after, and all these things bring us back to archiving. So this is an area which needs work. I think it needs work in Sri Lanka, but I think we're learning as we go along, and the digital archive is incredibly important. There are archives, and there have been amazing archive projects. One which is now based in Jaffna, in fact, that was spearheaded by Shanadhan and Charmini, but it's not accessible online, and this is hugely problematic in the world we live in today, and how with the art world internationally, how it functions in the digital space. So yes, as a gallery now, it's a priority for us as well. I mean, we're trying to begin working on publications. We're really at the sort of beginning stages, but hopefully in the next couple of years we'll be able to realize some projects, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, it all brings us back to archiving. So it's really exciting to be able to work with somebody like Sandhini, who is willing to sort of guide us through in some areas which are completely new. And to be honest, we need, that insight into the level of, there's archiving and archiving, so how far you need to go. And it's actually wonderful also to really get to a point where you are going so far into an artist's history that you're discovering things that the artists themselves have forgotten. That's a really wonderful point, I think, when you're working with senior artists like Jagat Veerasinghe and Chandragupta Tenwara. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that's incredibly important.
Thank you. I would love to ask more questions, but I think it's only fair to open it up to our audience to see if anyone has any questions. We probably have time for one or two, but please do post them in the Q&A and I will read them out. Hope we have them. And as people are thinking of questions, I can ask everyone to answer very quickly. Just a bit question, but we're looking towards the long term of the Sri Lankan art ecosystem. What can all three of you and the wider South Asian kind of professionals in the field around Sri Lanka, what can we build together for Sri Lankan art and its context, South Asia in general? What would be, all three of you, if you had to give one little quick answer? If you want to start, Saskia. Sorry to put the pressure on you.
Well, no, I mean, it's honestly why we do what we do. I mean, it's all about Sri Lankan art, and I think I think the Sri Lankan art scene, the local Sri Lankan art scene, has to be more open, to collaboration, has to be more open to projects, and have more conversations about how to improve archiving, how to improve access, access to information, access to collections. I think that it's both ways. I think now that Sri Lanka is more open, we're not a country at war, and I mean, a little bit in a different place than we were 1 year ago. So it's a bit, calmer to come here now, somewhat. I think people need to come in and take that time. And if curators such as Sandhini are willing to really sort of dig out that information, yes, it takes more time and effort to really find that, but there is so much that can be done, and so much that needs to be uncovered and discovered in the scene. But it involves, I think, an effort on both sides. And I think there are some wonderful projects in there at the MMCA, which is sort of at the very first stages, Colombo Scope, which is now in its fifth edition. So I think that there are really wonderful projects, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity for people from all over the world to come and really see what's happening here, because it's a wonderful time. I think Freeze and the project that Sandhini bringing Amrita and SFG in that particular moment highlights something that's happening. Amrita working with, coincidentally, these artists from the diaspora. But still, I mean, it aligns. There's obviously something going on, and Sri Lanka, compared to 10 years ago now, is more present when you look at the South Asian industry, look at the South Asian region and what's happening with that. So I just think it's a really interesting time for people to engage, and it's a time for collaboration, and being open and willing to make that happen. I think there's a question, but
there is a question. So it continues kind of what you were saying, but from someone in the audience, Mayantha, thank you for asking the question. What is the best position that Sri Lankan art can achieve in the level of being international?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Can you repeat it?
So what is the best position, or where is, I guess the question is really, what's the ideal position we can get to for Sri Lankan art to achieve the being international idea?
I would imagine being in a museum collection alongside artists from everywhere in the world. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it would be nice for any of these artists that Saskia works with, that I work with, to be at the Guggenheim on display whenever the museum opens, alongside their peers from other parts of the world, or to be on view here at the Tate if they're within the Tate collection, or whichever institutions are collecting that. And I think also for artists, artists to have solo exhibitions as well in spaces like, I mean, I don't know this all the spaces, but for example, Chisenhale Gallery, or that are highlighting interesting international artists, or to be showing where broader audiences can just access them, I think.
I mean, just to complement that, and just to problematize it a little bit, I also feel like Sri Lankan artists need to show up in South Asia more. That South Asia itself is international. And so we need more Sri Lankan artists in India. I mean, we need more Sri Lankan artists in Pakistan. I mean, somebody like Maria Lukman is important because, of course, she's Mohammad Qadar's wife. She's also an academic. She lives between Karachi and Galle. She did her PhD at Oxford, was in the Istanbul Biennial. So she's terribly international, right? Already. I did a small exhibition that's still on view at the Ishara Art Foundation now in Dubai, and Ishara is another really nice platform for South Asia and South Asian diasporic artists in Dubai. And we had both Chandragupta Thenuvara's work as well as Anali Pereira's work. Now, this is interesting because they're so well respected in South Asia, but they're not known in Dubai. So the internationalism, of course, can come in through the Museum of Modern Art and the Guggenheim and the Tate and M+ and these kind of mega museums. But it can also happen more regionally, where biennials in the region, the Sharjah Art Biennial, Istanbul, Colombo Scope, these are really important. MMCA, Kiranada Museum of Art, the MAP collection in Bangalore, Dhaka Art Summit, that increases your internationalism too. And the other thing I'd like to say is that internationalism also comes through quality and rigor. So if Saskia, if somebody organizes an international level exhibition at the Lionel Wendt Center with a great amount of scholarship and rigor and art historical integrity, that makes it international too. Because we are now presenting ourselves and seeing ourselves as players in an international dialogue. So we don't need just the Guggenheims and the Tates to showcase our artists and our regions and our languages. We ourselves are the entrepreneurs. We ourselves are the cultural practitioners, and we are creating an internationalism based on our own standards.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we need to run all these things in parallel, as it were.
They have to all be together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also about mindsets locally. I mean, for me, it's about the way in which the art scene and the artists see themselves. And I keep coming back to this moment with multiple conversations, but where I was thanking Sandhini for the invitation to freeze, and the acknowledgement that she was making to artists, some of the artists that we were working with. And she said, well, Saskia, these are artists that we study in South Asian art history. And I think that as much as being international should be something we want to do, especially as representatives of the scene, I think the artists themselves need to understand where they really are positioned, regionally and internationally, and understand what they have achieved, because our leading artists have perhaps, you know, are being given these opportunities later, in a stage much later. Sri Lanka is being exposed due to the situation that the country has been in for so long. It's been delayed, but that doesn't mean that the art scene itself hasn't been incredibly vibrant. There isn't this wonderful history of modern and contemporary art, and I think Amrita's work goes to show, you know, that there is so much to be discovered. So as much as being international is incredibly important, it's also about appreciating and acknowledging what the art scene in Sri Lanka is.
I think the other thing is that, Saskia, you recently showed at the India Art Fair for the first time. And there was am I right that there was a patrons group from MMCA that came to Delhi recently, and vice versa? There was a group from the Asia Society group that went to Sri Lanka.
Yes.
So these things are happening already, and it's great, I think.
Absolutely. I think that's something that COVID has also brought us, is this connection where we're less restricted by, you know, the time it takes to get on a plane and go somewhere. We've been having so many conversations like this, where we're really able to connect and engage and even brainstorm and make things happen. But yes, it was the second time at India Art Fair, but the patrons group from the MMCA. So all of these are interconnected and show how we need to work together as an industry to make that happen. But equally so, the Asia Society bringing their caravan over to Colombo, with all the members who were literally visiting for the first time. That made a huge difference, and so many things and so many projects have materialized from that. So yes, there is a lot, as Amrita said, there is already a lot happening, which is great. It's just the beginning.
Thank you all. I feel like, I mean, I know when we did a preparatory call, we could have spent hours as well talking, but I think you all three have given such a brilliant snapshot into the work that you're doing and that you're continuing to do, and that the work that needs to be done to celebrate Sri Lankan modern and contemporary art, both in Sri Lanka, in South Asia, and in the international art scene. But I wanted to, so thank you, Saskia, thank you, Amrita, and thank you, Sandhini, so much for joining today. I forgot.
And thank you to the audience.
Yes, and thank you for all of you for joining. And if you weren't able to join today, or if you had friends who were unable to join as well, it will be on, it's on Facebook, and it's going to go on both Saskia's website and ASAP's website. I also wanted to really give a huge thanks to the Faisal Shabana Foundation for making this possible and for supporting us for this talk series. Our next talk will be taking place next month, at the end of next month, and we'll have one more collaborative talk in July as well. So please stay tuned for our social media and newsletters to find out more. And yes, so thank you again for everyone for joining, and enjoy your evenings.
Thank you. Thank you, Amrita. Thank you, Sandhini.